Welcome to the Businesstalk podcast. I'm Deepak, joining you from India and delighted to host today's episode. It's a true pleasure to have Dr. Sarah Whitley joins us as our distinguished guest on today's episode. Dr. Sarah Whitley is an assistant professor of marketing at the University of Georgia's Terry College of Business. Her research focuses on consumer judgment and decision making, including how people search for information online and how they can evaluate prices and product value. Dr. Sarah earned her PhD in marketing from Boston University and previously studied economics at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Her work has been published in leading journals such as Journal of Consumer Research, Journal of Consumer Psychology, Journal of Marketing Research, and Journal of Marketing. Today, Professor Sarah Whitley joins us to discuss her research, Positive Emotions During Search Engine Use. How you feel impacts what you search for and click on. Let's not keep you waiting. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sarah Whitley to the conversation. Professor Sarah, we deeply appreciate your gracious acceptance of our invitation. It's a true honor and privilege to host you today.
Thank you so much for having me, Deepak. I'm really excited to chat with you and tell you more about what I've been working on.
Thank you. Professor, your model argues that incidental positive emotion, unrelated to the task, still changes what people type in a search bar. What convinced you this emotion keyword choice linked was worth testing in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was lucky to work on this project with two other co-authors here at UGA, so Anindita Chakravarty and Pengyuan Wang. And they both are more strategy-based researchers, whereas I'm a more of consumer behavior. And they had this interesting data set on search engine use, where they found that when there were positive emotion words in a search query, it made people more likely to click on an ad, but they had no idea why, right? So consumer behavior researchers, we're the ones who try to answer the question why. So it didn't necessarily start with us thinking that, positive incidental emotion makes people more likely to put positive emotion keywords in their search query. That's what we found out later, right? We observed in the data that positive emotion keywords exist in search queries, but what makes them end up there, right? And so one of the ways that we tried to explore it was like, well, you're either looking for something positive, right, out of the blue, or there's something about how you feel in the moment that makes you more likely to look for these things that you describe in a positive way. And so that's how we ended up kind of examining this question that, well, how you feel at the time really impacts how your brain sort of articulates the thing that you're interested in, right? So if I'm in a good mood, I'm more likely to think about the thing that I'm interested in a very positive light and might describe it with positive emotion words.
Professor, in your pilot study, you compare click-through rates for queries with a positive emotion descriptor versus crafted non-emotion counterparts. What were the toughest methodological choices in building those counterpart queries fairly?
Yeah, this is a great question. It's something that we thought about a lot when we were trying to think of a valid way to test the effect of these positive emotion keywords versus not. So one way you could look at it was to test it without any descriptive keywords, but there's, a fair difference there. So we wanted to develop non-emotion counterpart queries. And obviously, to kind of limit any potential bias, we couldn't come up with them ourselves, right? So we have a long document in our web appendix where we kind of provide details on how we sort of went through the methodology of looking at these search engine results and evaluating things. And so what we did was we hired two linguistic experts from a freelancing website. And so we had them evaluate the positive emotion keywords first, right? And so had them articulate whether those positive emotion keywords that were seen in a query actually described the product itself, right? Is it a exciting book, right? Or is it just, search for Adam's exciting bookstore, right? So one of those is a name, one of them is actually a keyword. So we needed real people to figure that out, but it couldn't be us. So those same experts, we then had them create non-emotion keyword queries as a counterpart to the ones that they were looking at. And we gave them two specific instructions. The first was come up with a descriptive word for this product that does not convey any emotion, right? So it's not emotion. And also that should meaningfully describe the product. So it can't be a nonsense word, right? It needs to be something that would be common. So oftentimes what we found that they would come up with would be like color or material type descriptors, right? So instead of an exciting book, it might be a black book, or instead of inspiring water bottle, it might be a metal water bottle, right? So that is how we try to come up with these counterpart queries more fairly. Yep.
Professor, you report higher CTRs for positive emotion queries. Example, roughly 0.09 versus 0.07 in one paid comparison. What does that effect size mean in practical terms for a marketer deciding which keywords to bid on?
Sure. So the way to kind of interpret this, right? The 0.09 is the CTR, or basically 9 out of 100 impressions received a click, right? So 0.07 is that 7 out of 100 impressions received a click. And so this difference of 2 clicks out of 100 impressions could amount to a difference of thousands and even more if we consider the millions of search impressions that happen on a daily basis, right? So while it seems small in that realm, we have to think that the large number we're actually thinking of is very big. So once you magnify that number on this large scale with the millions of impressions, it actually makes a decent difference. And especially when marketers are trying to bid on the same words all the time, having a little bit of an edge matters.
Professor, the paper positions positive emotion keywords happy, joyful, inspiring, etc. is a new class of targetable keywords alongside classical categories like brand deal or location terms. How should advertisers integrate emotion keywords without diluting relevance?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think first advertisers should evaluate if the positive keywords are actually relevant to their product context, right? So we find this effect across multiple types of products, but the incidence of positive emotion keywords existing in search queries is a lot higher in some categories than others, right? So even in our experimental ones, people are more likely to use positive emotion keywords when they're describing a book than something much more utilitarian like a water bottle. It still happens, but the incidence rate is higher, right? And so if you are a digital advertiser and you're trying to evaluate which keyword should I bid on and for what types of products, you're going to get the most bang for your buck if it's fairly common for people to employ positive emotion keywords to describe one of your products. And so we had a little table at the end of our paper where we showed the relevance or the likelihood of positive emotion keyword usage across different product contexts. And so for some of these where the product context, you're much more likely to see those incidents, it's going to be a much more advantageous strategy, right, than product categories that are on the lower end of this incidence rate.
Professor, key mechanism is reduced use of persuasion knowledge when the query contains positive emotion words. How do you explain that in a plain language to someone who thinks people know ads are ads?
Yeah, another great question. So people do know that ads are ads. It's not that they don't recognize that the ad is there, right? It's not that they don't see it or they're less aware. Persuasion knowledge has kind of two parts. The notion of persuasion knowledge is one, that people are aware of a persuasion attempt, and two, that they view that persuasion attempt negatively. And so when I say that people still see the ads, it's not that they don't notice them, because often we would ask manipulation checks, do you recall seeing an ad? Right? They would say yes. But instead, it was just that they didn't view this in a negative light as much when they were in this positive emotion state and employing positive emotion keywords. So it's kind of that second part, that negative view of the persuasion attempt that was basically getting a little bit of a lift, right? It wasn't being viewed as negatively when you're in this positive emotion state.
Professor, your framework treats search as a sequence, keyword selection first, then an evaluation click. Where in that sequence do you think platforms or UX design most strongly amplify the emotion effect?
Sure. So we can't easily predict what's in a consumer's head, right? They spontaneously generate words to describe the things that they're interested in looking for. And, trying to figure out what sort of drives those queries is a bit difficult. So our ability for marketers to impact that is harder. But understanding the consequences of what happens when certain emotion keywords are used, and that might shed light on what was in their mindset, that's where we can really kind of have more of a change. So I would say that when we think about how things are designed, the way in which search results are designed, how they're configured, how things are organized really does play a greater role. So for instance, we find in our work that this emotion effect is most amplified if the ad in this list of search results is in a much more prominent location, right? It's not that people don't necessarily see it in a less prominent location, but they're less likely to click on things anyways as they kind of go down the page, right? So you're already, people tend to dismiss ads in general, but at least if it's at the top and this negative effect or this negative viewpoint is less in this positive state, then there's a greater chance that it's going to benefit you, right? But if no one looks at the 8th or 10th link on a page, then putting your ad in the 8th or 10th position, you're really not going to see much of an effect, even from this, boost from emotion, because it's just not being considered in the same way.
Professor, studies 1 and 3 focuses on whether positive emotion increases the use of positive emotion keywords in queries, including both organic query generation and more controlled descriptor choice designs. What did you learn by moving from free text queries to constrained keyword list?
Sure. So the free text query generation is great in that it allows us to have more external validity. It's more organic and a natural process. But our work wasn't just looking at how do people generate queries, right? The big kind of key effect for marketers is how does what's in their query impact their choice behavior? And so we knew that if we were going to look at choice behavior in order to create tightly controlled experimental designs to look at choice behavior, we were going to have to develop stimuli that at least examined a specific product type, right? We needed to contain that in some way. And so because we knew we would need to get to this point at the end, we also needed to control something in the beginning, because as you see in our later studies, we kind of go all the way through this sequence. And so we developed these to have a tighter causal test, right? We even kind of discuss in our methodological section in the web appendix of like, how did we come up with these emotion descriptor keywords that they gave people the choices of? A lot of it was looking at what, types of emotions, like what the Reiken's 1997 emotion set of emotions, like which words from each of these emotion types did we see tended to appear in positive emotion queries more? And so we used that, as well as in trying to think for specific product context, are there certain emotions that are more relevant than others to help us develop them? We change these positive emotion keywords a little bit depending on what type of product that we're looking at, but also we see a lot of replication of the same type of word being used, right? So a cheerful water bottle, or a cheerful book, or a cheerful t-shirt, right? The similar notion of promoting positive, happy emotion is doing the same thing. So that helped us a lot to learn that even if we were to constrain it within a category, the effect still happens, right? And then because it's in this tightly controlled experimental design, we can really pinpoint what it is that's causing it, right? Because when everything is much more organic, there could be lots of other things that might be playing a role.
Professor, you note that search ads are disclosed with labels like ad or sponsored, and that such disclosures often activate persuasion knowledge. Why might a positive emotion query dampen that skepticism even when disclosures are present?
So kind of similar to my response before, it's not that people don't see the ad, right? It's not that they don't see the disclosure, but rather they're just a little bit less suspicious of advertisers' intentions for putting the ad content in the search results when they're in this positive state. So a lot of the time when we think about the negative view of advertising when you're exerting persuasion knowledge, it's often that you think there's some type of manipulative intent on behalf of the advertisers or on behalf of the marketer. And so when you're in this positive mood, this positive state, and you're employing positive emotion keywords to describe the things you're interested in, you kind of have these rose-colored glasses. You don't feel as negatively about the potential intent of these advertisers, right? The ad is there, but it's not necessarily that they want me to click on this or they're trying to do this. That negative viewpoint is lifted a little bit.
Professor, the paper suggests advertisers could time beats around periods when people may be in a better moods, like weekends or holidays. And that effect may be stronger for more hedonic categories like clothing, entertainment, and dining. How confident should practitioners be about these boundary conditions today?
So the data that we looked at is not from that long ago. And I think that the factors of looking at, specific holiday events, weekend days where you tend to be in a more positive mood than maybe weekdays should still hold today, right? There are obviously certain current events and various things that can influence our emotions at any time. And so being mindful of those, right? But essentially, our work finds that if you're in a positive mood, it makes you more likely to use these positive emotion keywords. These are already pretty low-hanging keywords to target anyways, because they're not as commonly targeted. That would definitely be worth testing to see for specific companies if they were to strategically focus on these positive emotion keywords during these positive times. Is it going to give you more lift than if you're just doing it on, every single day, right? So theoretically, our work suggests it should be true. We find evidence of it in our archival data set that had about 50 million search queries. So yeah, I think it should work today.
Professor Sarah, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question. From
Mhm.
an ethics and consumer welfare standpoint, what responsibilities do advertisers and platforms have if mood congruent search terms can make people less likely to apply persuasion knowledge and more likely to click paid results?
I think this is a great question, Deepak. And something that marketers should be mindful of, especially marketing researchers. I think that it honestly depends on the intention of the ad as to whether we should view it as something of ethical concern or not. So, in general, the idea of marketing is that our goal is to match consumers with a product that best fits their needs and improves their life and welfare, right? And so if that is your goal as an advertiser, is that you want to provide information about a product that you think would improve certain people's lives, then knowing when they're going to be more receptive to that content, for instance, when they're in a positive mood and using positive emotion keywords, is good from an ethical and a consumer welfare standpoint. However, if the ad content is more manipulative in its intent, right? If it's using various tactics that are commonly employed to gain consumer attention, like, specific scarcity strategies or strategies that try to make people look or just catch their eye or make them shocked by something, right? That's just for attention rather than consumer welfare improvement. Then we start to kind of enter into this gray area where it feels like, you're kind of preying on consumers. You know that they're going to be more vulnerable or more open to your content, but is that content actually good for them? And that's, a question that we as marketers in a field need to be more responsible of, right? So I think it depends on the intent of the ad. But it is a great question that we'll continue to kind of wrestle with, and which are the firms that kind of abide by these more ethical viewpoints and which ones don't.
Thank you, Professor Sarah, for joining us and for sharing such clear, grounded insights from your research work. Your perspective on how emotions can subtly shape what people search for and how they evaluate sponsor results add a valuable lens for both researchers and practitioners. We truly appreciate your time and generosity in walking us through the ideas, the evidence, and the implications. Thank you once again, and we look forward to following your future research and having you back on the podcast again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Deepak. It's been a pleasure.